God, this morning we come seeking your still speaking voice, hoping that you will speak afresh into our lives, that our ears will hear anew, and more importantly, that our hearts will hear anew. And so this morning we pray that the meditations of all of our hearts and the words of my mouth would be pleasing to you, and where we depart from your Spirit, O God, may that quickly fall away. Amen.
Amen.
Entitled is a word we hear a lot these days. We hear it applied to immigrants and refugees who presume that they can come here seeking safety, find a better life, and be kept together with their families. We hear it applied to welfare, disability, food stamps, and affirmative action recipients. We hear it applied to millennials who were raised during the recession. An old high school acquaintance even inferred about me the other day that I am entitled. The context of the conversation was the recent Supreme Court decision about the wedding cake being baked, and he said I was entitled for thinking that I should be fairly or equally treated by businesses. It would be nice to say that this is just one group of people or one political party in our country uttering this accusatory word, but that would be a lie. Liberals might argue on a macro level for the government to care for those on the margins. But when someone homeless approaches them on the street and asks them personally for help, particularly if they do so in a pushy or overly expectant way, I've heard that same word escape their lips: entitled. That word, entitled, or words like it, even occasionally sometimes come out of our beloved Good Sam members. It comes up when someone in our midst expects the church to help them, but hasn't, quote, paid their dues to the church. Let's face it, sometimes we have disdain for those who are asking for help, particularly, right, if they do so too boldly. Even if the need is real, even if the gratitude is real. The Gospel of Mark opens our scene today with Jesus, the healer. With he and his friends having just returned back across the sea into Jewish territory after being in Gentile territory. Now, contextual statements like that we often just gloss over. It's another time and place, a whole other world, right? It doesn't mean much to us. But maybe we do know something about this contextual marker today. We know something, right, about the tensions at border crossings. And we know something about the storms people face getting there. And we know something about what it looks like to flee your country because you fear violence in your homeland and you're desperate. You fear so much that your life or your loved ones' lives are in danger that you go to a whole other country. We know what that looks like. And we know what it looks like when you arrive and you're not as warmly welcomed as you'd hope to be in this country in which you sought refuge. And we know what it looks like for those refugees to be deported or strongly encouraged to go back home, or to realize once they get to that country of refuge that they were actually safer where they were. Today, you don't have to have traveled to the Middle East to enter our biblical story. All you need is to have turned on the news in the past month. Today, you don't have to picture some sea you've never seen before, the Sea of Galilee. Instead, let's just say today that our scene opens with Jesus and his disciples having just come back across the Rio Grande, the river separating Mexico and the U.S., back to a land that they had fled because of violence, back to a land where Jesus knew he was facing almost certain death for his queer ways and his very bizarre form of ministry. Our story today starts in deep, deep tension. And if Jesus isn't feeling fearful, then his disciples certainly are. But they're warmly met by the crowd that usually follows them. The poor, the marginalized, the disenfranchised. These people flock all around them when they get there. But they're probably thinking, whew, we have to be really careful not to step even one toe out of line, not to cross the wrong person in power, or we'll be fleeing again. And then up the road comes one of the local power brokers, a synagogue leader, with a whole posse of people with him. Now, he's part, likely, of that group of power brokers in the region who had originally made Jesus and his friends feel like they needed to flee for their lives. Among the disciples, I imagine seeing this official walking toward them had to be a little bit like the huddled whispers at the back of a bus in Arizona or California or Texas when an ICE agent boards. Careful, careful, easy now. The dark-skinned Latinx people, whether citizens or not, whispering to each other at the back of the bus, just look down, pretend to be asleep, don't answer their questions, tell them that you don't have to answer. I wonder if Jesus and his disciples had ever been to a Know Your Rights training, if they knew what they did and didn't have to do and say with this official. Or maybe they had no rights. But Jairus, the agent of the synagogue, he hasn't come to interrogate Jesus or to try to trap him, not come to send him packing once more. He's come to Jesus to ask his help. Now, any of you who have ever lived on the margins in fear of the power brokers, whether they be gang leaders or ICE agents, you understand how strange and bizarre this scene is. Their oppressor has come asking for their help. Now, Jesus' disciples are no doubt probably split right down the middle, and probably feeling, there's probably some of them who are grumbling under their breath, saying, why should we help this guy? He's one of the bullies. And probably they're feeling pretty self-satisfied with themselves that finally they have some sort of power to hurt back. Meanwhile, the other half of the disciples are probably saying, this is perfect. This is our way back in. If we can get in good with this powerful guy, then maybe we'll get some... Jesus, though, sees something different in him. He sees a father who, unlike so many other parents at the time, when child mortality rates were nearly 60%, has actually let himself become attached to his child. He's taken the risk of love. Loving a child, not just an heir or a son, but a daughter, who is just barely considered a woman at 12 years old. Jesus sees this in this father, and so he agrees to go with him. But they're interrupted. Someone has touched Jesus. Power has gone out from him. Sure, in a crowd this size, there's all sorts of people touching Jesus. But this was different, and he senses it. A woman who has been bleeding for years and thus has been considered ritually unclean, a complete and total social outcast for over 12 years, over a decade, someone who's been shunned. She's touched him. And in touching him, she has made him ritually unclean as well. And she's done this right in front of the synagogue official. A woman touching a man, and not just any man, a religious teacher. The brazen, audacious boldness of this action is utterly startling, and maybe it's a little bit lost on us in our current context. But his disciples have to be thinking, "Oh, fudge." And the whispers between them are starting again. Maybe the official didn't notice. Maybe we can just play it off. No, your eye's playing tricks on you. She didn't really touch him. He's still ritually clean enough to come heal your daughter. And then Jesus pipes up, "Who touched me?" The disciples snap their heads in horror. Oh no. He could have passed as ritually clean. Why is he drawing attention to it? Please don't. The bold woman comes forward. She gets on her knees. She's scared. And she tells him just what she's done. But she doesn't apologize. A power transfer has occurred in that moment of touch. Now, surely the disciples have to be thinking that word, entitled, about her. Heads, they're attacking her methods. She could have come to ask for help in much more legal and appropriate ways. She could have stood at a distance, like the social outcasts were supposed to, and called out for help, not crossed those borders between ritually clean and unclean. Yeah, who knows if she would have been noticed. 12 years on the outside looking in can make someone pretty invisible. But she could have tried. Instead, she just marched right through all those borders and boundaries like she had every right to be there. And she brushed up against Jesus' greatness, acting like she had every right to take her healing, take her salvation, without asking permission. But sometimes that's what it takes, isn't it? For someone on the margins to get what they need. Jesus doesn't hold it against her. After all, I'm pretty sure he knew legality was a matter of power, not justice. And not every law was just, and she certainly had no power. No, instead, Jesus praises her for her faith. And he calls her daughter, right there in front of that official who had realized the immense value of a daughter. He calls her daughter, perhaps hoping that this official will recognize his own daughter in her and see value in her life. Now this woman, this bold woman who has touched Jesus, she's been bleeding this official's daughter's whole life. She's been waiting for life, community, his daughter's whole life, the whole time that he has been caring for and nurturing and falling in love with his little girl, for whom now he's so scared. And then another interruption comes. This story is chock full of interruptions. This time it's the servants of that agent of the synagogue. People who don't even bother to look at or address Jesus. So silly and magically thinking, they think, is it that Jairus has come out of desperation to this street rat for help. They tell Jairus, she's died. You must come grieve. Too bad, they think. This street preacher guy can't heal her now, can't come touch her, because no one can touch a ritually unclean dead body. Little did they know that this bleeding woman in the crowd has flung Jesus out into the margins with the ritually unclean. She's already pulled him down from whatever relative position of privilege he was in, and so there's nothing to hold him back from going and touching this dead body that's ritually unclean. So he goes to the little girl. He encourages the father to have bold faith like this bleeding, marginalized woman, not to give up hope in fear. He goes to his daughter, but he doesn't take the crowds with him, because the work of an ally, the work of an advocate, is not supposed to be a spectacle. It's not supposed to center oneself. Forget the powers that be, forget the laws and the regulations and the customs, forget the safe prescribed path. Jesus breaks all the rules, shoves right on through all the borders and boundaries, and he reaches out and he touches what everyone thinks is this dead body. He takes the young woman and, holding her hand in solidarity, he lifts her right back into life. And not only does he raise her, but he advocates for her. Someone get her some food. And so this is how Jesus' life and ministry, once again back in his homeland, a place he knew would kill him for his differences, his willingness to break all the corrupt, inhumane laws, it's how it begins. And he's going to stay there, and he's going to continue ministering in that way that ruffles so many feathers in order to touch people and heal people with compassion, with love. When I was 10 years old, I got poison oak all over my body. My friends and I were playing out in the woods, and I don't know if I rolled in it or what, but it was all over. And I grew up in a really affectionate family. But I remember that week, no one gave me a hug or a squeeze on the shoulder or even held my hand. I don't think they did it intentionally, it just happened. But at the end of the week, I was a wreck. Because we all crave and need touch. We all crave belonging. We all crave safety and security, refuge and sanctuary. And when we get desperate enough, when we've been deprived enough, we reach out and we grab hold of it wherever we can find it. I think at some point that week I just reached out and latched on to someone. When you're desperate, when you're living on the margins, you stop caring how bold or brazen or entitled it makes you look. You just take it. And that's not to say without gratitude, but you take it because you need it. Now, even if you come from a place of relative privilege and power, like that synagogue official, when you're desperate, you stop caring about all of that. You stop shoulding on yourself. You stop telling yourself all the things you should do, all the people you should exclude or keep at arm's length, the people who you should try to control, and you just open your arms to receive. You don't care anymore about saving face or upholding the system or keeping your position of power. One biblical commentator I read this week put out a big question. Why does Mark's gospel tell us this story in the first place? I think it's because Jesus shows us what God looks like. Someone who steps out onto the margins, who cares more about justice and love than legality, more about compassion than self-preservation. Someone who knows how to be a true ally and a true advocate, how to give power away, how not to center oneself. Someone who is ruled more by the humanity they see right there in front of them and by love than by fear. someone who's not intimidated or repulsed by the boldness of those on the margins to claim their own worth and value, healing and justice, but who praises them for it. Someone who expects the first to humble themselves and the last to raise themselves up with God's help. So this week, as we celebrate our country's founding on ideals that, if we're completely honest, we've never lived into fully or well, I encourage you to walk into that place of risk. That place where, depending on your level of privilege or marginalization, you might either need to be bolder than you think you are, or humbler than you think you have in you. And advocate for healing. Advocate for inclusion, for justice, for yourself, or for someone you've decided to love, despite all the voices telling you not to. Decide this week to care. Really care, even when others tell you you shouldn't or that they don't. Walk into that place of risk, for I promise you God is already there standing in solidarity with those in need and ready to take you by the hand. Be brazen. Brush up against the kingdom. It's already been given to you. It already belongs to you. And I promise you will find hope and healing and beloved community there. May it be so. Amen.
Amen.